every morning, before the demands of the empire arrived at his door, before the generals and the senators and the petitioners and the endless weight of governing the known world descended on him, a man sat down alone and wrote. He did not write orders. He did not write speeches. He did not write the kind of words that were meant to be read by others, to impress, to persuade, to command. He wrote to himself, to remind himself how to be human, to push back against the gravitational pull of his own comfort and his own ego and his own capacity for self-deception, to return, again and again, to the discipline that he believed was the only thing that actually mattered. That man was Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commander of the greatest military force in the ancient world, ruler of 60 million people across 3 continents. By every external measure, the most powerful human being alive in the 2nd century. And every single morning, he sat down and reminded himself not to be arrogant, not to be lazy, not to let the day pass without meaning, not to treat the people around him as tools, not to waste the hours, not to forget that he was going to die, and that the dying could come at any moment, and that this specific morning might be the last one. He wrote these reminders in Greek, in private, in a journal that was never intended to be published. The book we now know as Meditations was found after his death. It was his private conversation with himself, a daily practice of self-discipline so rigorous, so honest, so unflinching that it stands nearly 2,000 years later as one of the most remarkable documents of the human mind ever produced. This is episode 11 of Sera Self Discipline. My name is Sera, and today we are going inside the mind of the man who had every reason in the world to stop trying, and never did. Before we get to the philosophy, I want you to understand something about Marcus Aurelius that most people miss. He was not born into the role of emperor. He was adopted into it. And for much of his early life, he wanted nothing more than to be a philosopher. He studied Stoic philosophy with a devotion that his tutors found extraordinary. He practiced austere discipline in his personal life at a time when the culture of Rome was offering him every conceivable indulgence. And then the throne came to him, not as a gift, as a burden. Because the man who was emperor before him, Antoninus Pius, had named Marcus as his successor. And Marcus, being Marcus, took the responsibility with complete seriousness. Even though it meant trading the philosophical life he wanted for the political life the empire needed. He ruled for nearly 2 decades. Much of that time was spent at war, on the Danube frontier, living in military camps through brutal winters, far from Rome, far from comfort, far from anything that resembled the life he had imagined for himself. And it was during those years, in those camps, that he wrote the Meditations. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man in the world, sitting in a cold military tent, writing to himself about patience, about not losing his temper with difficult people, about doing his work without needing recognition for it, about remembering that the things he feared losing were not actually his. That image should shatter a certain comfortable lie that most of us tell ourselves. The lie that says, I will develop discipline when the circumstances are better, when I have more time, when I have more resources, when the pressure lifts, when things settle down. Marcus Aurelius had more pressure, more complexity, more demand on his attention and his energy and his patience than you or I will ever experience. And every morning he sat down and chose discipline anyway. Not because it was easy, not because the circumstances invited it, because he understood something that took him years of philosophy and years of experience to fully grasp. The circumstances never become perfect. The pressure never fully lifts. The demands never stop arriving. And the man or woman who waits for the right moment to begin the inner work will wait forever. You begin now, in the middle of everything. That is what Marcus showed us. The first concept I want to give you from the Meditations is one the Stoics called Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. The name sounds dark. And in a culture obsessed with positive thinking, with visualization of success, with manifesting desired outcomes, it sounds almost perverse. Why would you deliberately imagine things going wrong? Here is the Roman answer. And it is one of the most practically powerful ideas in the entire Stoic tradition. When you deliberately imagine the worst that could happen, before you need to, before the crisis arrives, in the calm of the morning or the evening before a difficult day, you do several things simultaneously. First, You strip the anticipated difficulty of its power to shock and paralyze you. The thing you have already faced in your mind cannot ambush you in reality. You have already been there. You have already survived it in the imagination. And when it arrives in actual life, some part of you is already steady. Second, you discover something important about most of the things you fear. When you actually sit down and follow the thread of the worst case to its end, really follow it, honestly, without flinching, you find that the end is not as catastrophic as the vague dread suggested. Most feared outcomes, fully examined, reveal themselves to be survivable. Difficult, yes. Painful, possibly. But survivable. And a difficulty that you have already accepted in advance is fundamentally different from a difficulty that has caught you by surprise. Third, and this is the dimension that the Stoics cared most about, Premeditatio Malorum reveals to you which of your fears are about things that are genuinely important and which are about things that merely feel important. The fear of failing publicly, the fear of losing status, the fear of someone's opinion of you changing. When you follow these fears to their actual ends, you often find that the catastrophe exists only in your imagination, not in reality. That even if the feared thing happens, your life continues. Your capacity to act continues. The work continues. Marcus wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Premeditatio Malorum is the practice that makes that realization real rather than merely intellectual. It takes the abstract philosophy and turns it into a daily exercise with immediate, measurable benefits for your stability, your courage, and your willingness to take necessary action in the face of uncertainty. Here is how to practice it. Every evening or every morning before the day begins, spend 5 minutes with this question. What is the most difficult thing that could happen today, or in this project, or in this period of my life? Then follow that difficulty to its actual end. Not its imagined catastrophic end. Its actual end. What would you do? How would you respond? What would remain for you to work with? This is not pessimism. This is what the Romans called prudentia, the disciplined foresight that prepares the mind for what is coming so that when it comes, the mind is already ready. The second concept is one that sounds, on the surface, almost impossible. And I want to be honest with you about that before I explain it. Amor Fati. Love of fate. Not acceptance of fate. Not resignation to fate. Not grudging acknowledgement of fate. Love. This was Nietzsche who gave it the precise Latin phrase, but the concept itself is pure Stoic, and Marcus lived it more completely than almost any human being in recorded history. The idea is this: everything that happens to you, every setback, every loss, every difficulty, every moment where life does not go as you planned or hoped or worked for, is not something to be merely endured. It is something to be actively embraced as the specific material you have been given to work with. Now I told you this sounds impossible. And the reason it sounds impossible is that it seems to demand that you feel good about bad things. That you pretend pain does not hurt. That you perform some kind of false positivity in the face of genuine loss. That is not what Amor Fati means. Amor Fati means that after you have felt the pain, after you have acknowledged the loss, after you have been honest about what happened and how it affected you, you turn to it and you say, "This is now the ground I am standing on. And I choose to build from here rather than stand here wishing the ground were different." Because wishing the ground were different does not change the ground. It only uses up the energy that could be used to build. Marcus Aurelius lost children. He fought wars he did not choose to fight. He governed through plagues and famines. He dealt with betrayal from within his own family. He faced, again and again, the most devastating things that life can deliver. And in his meditations, he returned constantly to the same practice. To look at what had happened, clearly and without flinching, and then to ask, given that this is the situation, what is the excellent response? Not the comfortable response. Not the angry response. Not the victimized response. The excellent response. Amor Fati is the discipline of answering that question seriously, even when the ground you are standing on is not the ground you wanted. In practice, this means developing what I would call the two-stage response. Stage 1. Honest acknowledgement. Something went wrong. This is hard. This is painful. I did not want this. All of that is true and must be allowed to be true. Stage 2. The pivot. Given that this is now my situation, what do I do next? Not what do I wish I could do. Not what I would have done if things had gone differently. What do I do next, from here, with what I actually have? The discipline of Amor Fati is the discipline of getting to stage 2 without getting permanently stuck in stage 1. And the people who master this are, without exception, the most formidable people you will ever encounter. Because they are never truly defeated. Because every defeat is, for them, simply the new starting point. The third concept from the Meditations is the one that sounds the most morbid and turns out to be the most life-giving. Memento Mori. Remember that you will die. The Romans were not sentimental about death. They placed death at the center of their philosophical practice, not to be grim but to be awake. Because the Stoics had observed something about human psychology that the modern world has completely forgotten in its obsession with comfort and longevity and the avoidance of anything unpleasant. When you forget that you are going to die, you start treating time as if it is infinite. You defer the things that matter. You tolerate the mediocre out of laziness. You let the urgent crowd out the important. You let other people's priorities replace your own. You live small and call it prudence. You procrastinate and call it patience. You waste the hours in distraction and call it rest. And then the time runs out. And the life that was supposed to be lived fully was never fully lived at all. Memento Mori is the antidote to that. Not as a morbid obsession. Not as a source of existential dread. But as a clarifying lens that you look through every morning before the day begins. Marcus wrote, "Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live. The present moment always will have been. Do what nature demands. Do it now while you can." That phrase, "the present moment always will have been," is one of the most powerful sentences in the entire Meditations. It means this: whatever you do in this moment, you cannot undo it. Whatever you fail to do in this moment, you cannot retrieve it. The moment is passing regardless of whether you are fully in it or not. The only question is whether you choose to be present for it or not. Whether you choose to act in it or not. Whether you give it the attention it deserves or let it slide past unexamined and unlived. Memento Mori makes that question urgent. Not in a panicked way. In a clarified way. The man who knows he is going to die is the man who knows what matters. And the man who knows what matters is the man who is very difficult to distract from it. Here is the practice. Every morning, before you begin anything else, spend 30 seconds with this thought: today could be my last day. Not as morbid theater. As a genuine question. If this were the last day I was given, how would I want to spend it? What would matter and what would not? Who would I want to be in it? You do not need to live in a state of constant awareness of death. You need only to touch that awareness briefly each morning, long enough to let it calibrate your priorities for the day. Long enough to let it remind you that the trivial things you were about to give your full attention to are not actually worth your full attention. Long enough to restore a sense of proportion to what the day is actually for. There is a fourth concept from Marcus and the Roman tradition that I want to bring to you because it is the foundation that holds all the others together. The Romans called it logos. The rational order. Marcus believed, as all Stoics did, that the universe is governed by a rational principle. That there is an underlying order to things, even when that order is not immediately visible. And that the human capacity for reason, our ability to think clearly, to examine our own minds, to choose our responses rather than simply react, is our participation in that larger rational order. This has a very specific and practical implication for how you approach your inner life. It means that the undisciplined mind, the mind that reacts without reflection, that is driven by every emotion that passes through it, that makes decisions based on fear or ego or immediate comfort rather than on considered judgment, is, in the Stoic view, a mind that has abandoned its own deepest nature. Logos says that you were built for reason. You were built for the kind of disciplined, careful, honest self-examination that Marcus practiced every morning in the Meditations. That the capacity to step back from your own impulses and evaluate them before acting on them is not some advanced spiritual achievement available only to philosophers. It is the basic functioning of a fully human mind. And the failure to use it, the choice to simply react, to go with every feeling, to let the environment determine your behavior, to stop examining your own motivations honestly, is, from this perspective, a failure to be fully human. That sounds harsh. Marcus intended it to be. He was harsh with himself in the Meditations in a way that most self-help content would find uncomfortable. He called himself lazy. He called himself vain. He noted his failures with complete honesty and zero self-pity. Not to punish himself. To correct himself. Because a man who will not see his own failures clearly is a man who cannot fix them. And a man who cannot fix his failures is a man who is, in the Stoic sense, failing at the most important job he has. Your most important job is the government of your own mind. Not your career. Not your reputation. Not your relationships, though those matter enormously. The government of your own mind is the foundation on which everything else is built. And it requires the same things that governing an empire requires: honesty, consistency, the willingness to make difficult decisions, and the discipline to return, every single day, to the principles you have committed to even when no one is watching and nothing is forcing you to. Let me give you Marcus Aurelius' morning rebuilt for the modern life. Because the man had a system, even if he never called it that. He began with reflection before action. Before the day made its demands, he sat with his own mind and asked, "What kind of person do I want to be today?" Not what do I want to accomplish. Who do I want to be in the accomplishing of it? The quality of character he was aiming at today. The specific virtue he was going to practice. He then practiced premeditatio. He anticipated the difficult people, the frustrating situations, the unexpected obstacles. He wrote in the Meditations, "When you wake, say to yourself, I shall meet people today who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and unsociable. They are like this because they do not know the difference between good and evil. But I know it. And so I can neither be harmed by them, nor can I be angry with them." That is not resignation. That is preparation. That is the disciplined mind walking into the day with its eyes open, having already decided how it will respond to what it will encounter, so that when the encounter comes, the decision has already been made and does not need to be made again under pressure. He then returned to work. Not inspired work. Not only when motivated work. The daily work of the emperor, which was relentless and often thankless and frequently frustrating. He did it because it was the work that was his. Because Logos said that to abandon the work that is yours is to abandon the rational order that gives your life its shape. And in the evening, he returned to the journal. To honest examination. Not to celebrate the day. To examine it. What did I do well? Where did I fall short of my own standard? Where did ego or laziness or fear move me when I should have moved myself? What do I correct tomorrow? That four-part structure, reflection, preparation, work, examination, is not complicated. It does not require expensive equipment or elaborate rituals. It requires only the same thing Marcus required of himself, the willingness to take your own inner life seriously. To treat the government of your own mind as the most important work you will ever do. Because it is. I want to close with something Marcus wrote late in the Meditations, near what scholars believe was the end of his life. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That sentence carries the full weight of the Stoic tradition in 11 words. Not more theory. Not more discussion. Not more planning and preparation and strategizing about the better version of yourself you intend to become. Be it. With the day you have. With the circumstances you have. With the tools and the energy and the time that are actually available to you right now, not the tools and the energy and the time you wish you had. Marcus Aurelius had every reason in the world to be less than he was. He had power, which corrupts. He had luxury, which softens. He had sycophants, which blinds. He had war, which breaks. He had loss, which bends. And every morning he sat down and chose, deliberately and consciously, not to be less than he was capable of being. He did not always succeed. The Meditations are full of the evidence of his failures, his frustrations, his moments of weakness. He was not a saint. He was a man. A man who took the discipline of his own mind more seriously than anything else in his life, who failed regularly, who returned to the work the next morning without self-pity or dramatic narrative, and who left behind, in the journals he never intended anyone to read, the most honest and most demanding blueprint for a disciplined life that the ancient world ever produced. That blueprint is yours now. The question is only whether you will use it. This is Sera Self Discipline. Episode 11. Meditations of the Emperor. Now go govern your mind.